Speaker, with the consent of the Majority Leader and the minority, I am introducing a resolution for immediate consideration commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Sport Fish Restoration Program. The Sport Fish Restoration Program is a pillar of American conservation funding. It's truly a unique American way to fund the efforts to conserve our wildlife. As a legislator, an outdoorsman, a fisherman, an environmentalist, and a conservationist, I know firsthand the immeasurable impact that sporting fishermen and fisherwomen have on our state, our beautiful state. A lot of people often assume that the government funds a lot of the improvements and the stocking of fish and the services we get when we go to boat ramps, but in fact, it's the people who use that resource as fishermen. We will buy our fishing licenses, our fishing tackle, fuel for our boats, and there is a tax that's on there that's matched by the federal government 3-to-1, and it goes directly to conserving land, promoting the use of our natural resources. And since 1939, the sportsmen and women have contributed over $78 billion through this tax to state fish and wildlife agencies. Plainly stated, without the contribution of anglers and hunters, we would not have the thriving wildlife and ecosystems that we all enjoy today. On the 75th anniversary of this program, it stands as one of the most successful examples of conservation funding in world history. Theodore Roosevelt, the father of American conservation, said, "There can be no greater issue than that of conservation in this country." And I agree with Theodore Roosevelt on that. This resolution is not just a celebration of a successful program, it's a recognition of the men and women who make it possible. It's an acknowledgement that sportsmen and women are not just users of our natural resources, but true stewards of the land, the lakes, and the wildlife that we treasure. Speaker, I ask that this be read at the rise and that it's left on the desk for additional signatures. Thank you very much.
House resolution commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Sport Fish Restoration Program as part of the American system of conservation funding. Whereas more than a century ago, hunters and anglers were among the first conservationists who realized Americans' natural resources were in peril and could not sustain unregulated harvest and habitat destruction. And whereas sportsmen and women took it upon themselves to support laws that stopped excessive harvesting of fish and wildlife, established state agencies to protect fish, wildlife, and their habitat, and supported special fishing and hunting license fees to help fund the new agency's efforts to provide healthy natural resources for future generations. And whereas the Rhode Island House of Representatives then and now recognize that the primary authority to protect and manage fish within their state waters resides in state agencies. And whereas upon realizing that license fees alone were insufficient to restore and sustain healthy fish populations, anglers supported excise taxes on fishing equipment to raise additional funds to support restoration and enhancement efforts of the state agencies. And whereas the Sport Fish Restoration Program, which began 75 years ago with passage of the Federal Aid in Sports Fish Restoration Act in 1950, further expanded with the Wallet-Rowe Amendment to the Sport Fish Restoration Act in 1984, is a vital part of the conservation funding in the United States. And whereas a manufacturer's excise tax on fishing equipment, along with an excise tax on motorboat and small engine fuels, is mostly distributed back to the states through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for fisheries conservation, management, and angler and boater access. And whereas this cooperative partnership between the sports fishing industry, anglers, boaters, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and state natural resource agencies has resulted in the most successful model of fisheries management in the world, restoring and enhancing populations across the United States and its territories. And whereas since 1939, the combined contribution of the wildlife and sport fish restoration programs and license fees to state fish and wildlife agencies exceeds $78 billion, more than any other single conservation effort in American history, which constitute collectively the American system of conservation funding. Now therefore be it resolved, the House of Representatives of the state of Rhode Island hereby recognizes America's anglers, boaters, the sports fishing industry, state fish and wildlife agencies, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for their leading role in restoring healthy populations of fish and aquatic resources, both game and non-game, to the abundance we see today with the help of the Sport Fish Restoration Program, in this, the 75th year of the program's establishment as part of the American system of conservation funding. Be it further resolved, the Secretary of State, being hereby is authorized and directed to transmit duly certified copies of this resolution to the Governor of the State of Rhode Island, Daniel J. McKee, to Mr. Terrence Gray, Director of the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, and to the members of the Rhode Island Congressional Delegation. This House also commends and appreciates the foresight and contributions from anglers, the sports fishing industry, state fish and wildlife agencies, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on behalf of our nation's fisheries and aquatic resources.